a lot of talk in UFO world that 2026 is a big year for disclosure. Steven Spielberg is producing his first big budget film in several years. I think it's actually called Disclosure. There's a documentary called Disclosure that has not had wide release yet, but Tim Burchett, a Republican congressman, was one of the guests of honors at the premiere in early 2025. Joe Rogan has talked about it on his show numerous times. The vice president of the United States recently said, right before you and I began taping this, that this is like his number one pet project, is to get to the bottom of this and the truth where this is concerned. The director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said in the days leading up to you and I recording this that she's not satisfied with the information being given to her on, this unidentified aerial phenomenon, which is the new branding now, UAP, nor is she even satisfied with the drone episodes were across the Jersey Shore over Christmas of 24. And then we saw this invade several military airspaces in our own country as well. So there does appear to be a level of escalation of the rhetoric of this and where this is all heading in the time period that you and I are discussing this. Who knows when this eventually runs, a few months from now or even next year, where the issue ultimately will be. So with that as a lead up, kind of your overall 10,000 foot view of this subject matter and, pardon the pun, phenomenon.
Okay, well, my overall perspective on this subject is that when you use the term UFO or UAP, you're talking about something unidentified, and you're absolutely right that there's that new term UAP. It's a new branding because that was really part of when they were rolling out this disclosure process. Just think about in Scripture where the one who gives names has authority over that. So when Adam was given dominion over the earth, he was told to name the animals, right? God, when he enters into covenant with Abram, renames him Abraham. We see this principle in Scripture because it's true that, right, you name your children and that shows your authority over them. And so UAP was really a way to begin this disclosure process and to begin it with a rebranding that came from inside the intelligence community, certain parts of the Pentagon, and to really make sure that they're wrestling control over this as they're releasing it. So my overall perspective on the phenomenon is, again, we're talking about something unidentified. So of course, misidentified things are going to be thrown into the UFO bucket. So we can all agree from the get-go, the vast majority of reports, when people say they've seen a UFO, UAP, it has an explanation. But even going back to the Air Force's Project Blue Book, 5% were data-rich encounters that it wasn't that they just didn't have enough information, couldn't identify it. It was more that it was unidentifiable. And that's when you have craft displaying these bizarre characteristics, going from 0 to thousands of miles an hour and pulling hundreds of Gs, right angle turns, all this sort of stuff that we've heard about. And so when we talk about that part of the phenomenon, the real true UFOs or UAPs, my conclusion and the conclusion of even a lot of secular researchers like Jacques Vallée is that what we're dealing with is not interplanetary, but it shows indications of being something more interdimensional. That is, it's coming from another realm into this realm. And so as a Christian, when I open up Scripture and I see all the top researchers coming to that conclusion, giving their reasons, when I look and see those very characteristics that fit with something coming in from another dimension, when I open up Scripture and the Scripture talks about a spiritual realm, we see instances like in the Old Testament, with where Elijah is, right, in 1 Kings, he is with one of his acolytes and they're surrounded by the enemy, and he prays to the Lord to open up his eyes, and he sees that they're surrounded by these fiery chariots, right? That the angels are almost in parallel to this world, not always visible, but they show themselves at times and can act at times. So that the spirit world that we see in Scripture that interpenetrates with this realm fits exactly with what we observe in the phenomenon. We can get more into that, I'm sure, through this discussion. And going back historically, we find, especially after the Renaissance, that there is this desire amongst, there was John Dee, the Rosicrucians, these other Renaissance era secret societies where they were seeking to advance scientific research through, they thought they were Christians doing this, contacting angels, which of course is forbidden in Scripture to seek out contact with the other side. But when we go back, we see that there is this tradition in Western culture of those who are seeking to advance civilization, those who are seeking to advance scientific research in modern times, going to the occult, going to the invisible world to look for insight in how we might advance our knowledge of the universe and of physics. Now, that got buried soon after the Renaissance as the Enlightenment broke out and materialism really became the reigning paradigm, but it was always there underground.
Metaphysics, alchemy, that's what you're kind of describing. Yeah.
All of that. Yeah, all of that. You can even see the roots of Freemasonry in some of that, though, of course, your average Freemason is just part of a men's club as far as they're concerned.
Right.
And then when the UFO phenomenon arises after World War II, there's some interesting figures that were associated with it who were part of that esoteric tradition.
Okay, we're gonna get to those. I'm gonna ask you about some of those names. As we go along, let's make sure we define terms. So you used the term Project Blue Book. That was essentially a psyop from the military-industrial complex to essentially propagandize that there was nothing to see here in the years after Roswell, and when this became a mainstream phenomenon. And even Mike Wallace on 60 Minutes is doing interviews with UFOs. They realized they had a problem. And so this was just basically professional debunking in order to stigmatize the phenomenon, correct? That's essentially what that was?
Correct. And it was rooted in what was called the Robertson panel, which was a CIA panel from the 50s that said, we need to do this because we don't want to create panic amongst the public. The Russians could use this to overwhelm our air defense systems. So that was the reason. Okay. And Blue Book was the result.
You mentioned Jacques Vallée. If you've ever seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind, then you know who, you just didn't know his name maybe, but that's the French guy that's depicted interviewing Richard Dreyfuss when they start taking his what he claims he is seeing seriously. That's based off of Jacques Vallée, correct? If memory serves, right?
That is correct. Yep.
And so he's kind of your most respected metallurgist historically in the modern UFO movement, right? Was that a good way to describe him?
Yes, he has examined the metals along with a guy named Dr. Gary Nolan. He's also a computer scientist and really a systems analyst. He started off as an astronomer. So all those things kind of converged together. And he was working with J. Allen Hynek, who was the scientific advisor for Project Blue Book, who later blew the whistle that he was told to make up all these stories about swamp gas. And so Jacques Vallée was friends with him and helping him with his database. And the conclusions he came to was really from that systems analyst side of things, looking at the overall patterns of the UFO phenomenon and then drawing conclusions as to what it appears to be doing. We see a lot of these men on the right now saying that the purpose of a system is what it does. Yep. Well, that is really the approach that Jacques Vallée took in looking at UFOs. That the purpose of UFOs is what they do. Yep. And based on what they do, he came to those conclusions that it's interdimensional and wants to change human beliefs.